Patriot Come Lately show. This is Stefan, your Patriot Come Lately, the voice of the Second American Revolution. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever or wherever you are listening. As someone who came to America to escape from the socialist nightmare, I am using this show to shake America awake. Join me in the next hour for constitutional conservative news and views, as well as the occasional guest. We have to rebuild that shining city on the hill by taking this great country back to the principles set forth by the founders.
And good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever you are listening to this show. This is Stefan, your Patriot Come Lately, British by birth, American by choice, and welcoming you to episode 286 of Patriot Come Lately Talk Radio. It is my honor and privilege to be talking to you tonight, and tonight we have a very special show. After a long time, I'm going to have a guest on the show. Now, unfortunately, it's not like my Blog Talk Radio times when I actually had live guests and they called in during the show and the interview was live. This one has been pre-recorded, but it's still a very interesting discussion that I will be having with my guest. But before we get to that, I do want to talk a little bit about some news, something that I wasn't able to get into last week's show, and I still think we need to hear about it. It's good news, but it's also bad news in the sense of something that it even happened. Luckily, it seems in this particular case there is a semi-good ending to it. And we'll quickly run through that, and then we'll get to the guest in just a few minutes. But for the moment, as well, I want to say hi to Rex, who has arrived in the chat room. And good evening to you, Rex. Hopefully, we get some others in the chat room later, and I will have more time tonight for the chat room because, of course, with the recording I will be able to listen along and I will be able to chat with you in the chat room. But anyway, let's go to the news first of all. The topic that I wanted to get into last week's show but wasn't able to, and this is I've mentioned on the show a few times now this insidious thing of civil forfeiture. This is basically the law that was introduced which enabled law enforcement authorities, and I'll use that term because it is quite a broad one. It allowed law enforcement authorities to seize goods, money, from someone who was suspected of doing something wrong and keep that money, basically. Now, you sort of say, well, that doesn't sound right. And no, it isn't. It was originally designed to allow police forces to confiscate goods from drug dealers, and they were allowed to keep the money, so it was a very good source of income. But of course, the law was not written very clearly, and so they were basically, it came to a situation where they could take almost anybody and anyone, and without any evidence, they could confiscate the money. Now, you can get the money back, but it's a civil thing. It's nothing to do with any criminal case. So even if you are arrested and then released without any charges being pressed, they don't give the money back. No, you actually have to take the police to court to get your money back. And it isn't just the police, it's also used by the IRS. And the story I wanted to mention, and I can't remember whether or not I actually brought this up a few weeks ago. I don't think this particular situation I ever got into the show. But this was a small convenience store. And a while back, the IRS stormed into his North Carolina convenience store. I don't know if they were carrying submachine guns and wearing full SWAT gear, because that's what they tend to do nowadays, but possibly not. But they stormed into his store and accused him of trying to cheat the government. And basically what they did, they showed him a list of his recent cash deposits, and those cash deposits were all just under $10,000. Now, you probably know there is a legal requirement, a federal rule that requires banks to report all transactions over $10,000. Now, think about that. What about your privacy? But okay, let's assume that that's something that has to happen because of drug dealers. And that's the argument that's used. But you see how it's being misused now. And he'd done these deposits, and they were just under $10,000. So let's say between $9,000 and $10,000. And that is known as structuring. So they accused him of doing that. Now, interestingly enough, the banks are supposed to report deposits over $10,000. So how did the IRS know about deposits under $10,000? In other words, all the deposits that you make are being reported to the IRS. Whether they're over or under $10,000, it seems they are doing that. But that's a whole nother story. And anyway, they confiscated $107,000 of this convenience store owner's money with no evidence. They had absolutely no evidence, just the fact that he'd been making these deposits. But he's a convenience store. Of course he deposits cash. Anyway, he took them to court. He won his money back. And on top of that, now he's taking them to court to win his legal fees, which in the law he's allowed to get. So the good news is, yes, he did beat the IRS. The bad news is this sort of thing is even happening, folks, and we really need to get rid of it. Well, tonight I promised you a very special guest, and this guest is a repeat guest. It's an author. His name is Paul Skousen. He's the son of W. Cleon Skousen, who wrote, amongst other things, The 5,000 Year Leap. That's a tremendous book if you haven't read it. And he is an author himself, and he has written a very interesting book recently, and he asked me to read it and then interview him, which I did. And this book is called Bassam and the 7 Secret Scrolls. But let me introduce him and let him tell you a little bit about himself, and then we'll start talking about the book. So here we go, folks. Paul, good evening. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stefan. An absolute delight and honor to talk to you. Thank you.
Paul, this book that you sent me, very interesting book. It's called Bassam and the 7 Secret Scrolls. But before we start on the book, do tell the listeners a little bit about your background, because I know I have a lot of new listeners who wouldn't know that much about you. And rather than me reading off the back of the book where there's a good description of who you are, why don't you tell it in your own words?
Okay, I'm happy to. I'm a former CIA guy for a few years, and then worked at the Reagan White House as an intelligence officer. And I'm a writer, a journalist. That's kind of my job in communications. I'm also a teacher. So I teach at a local university and a local college, gripping subjects like journalism and public speaking and public relations, those classes everybody avoids, right? So And I have written a few books. My father, as you mentioned, he wrote 2 books called The Naked Communist. The other was Naked Capitalist. He wanted to finish Naked Socialist, but he passed away, so I wrote that one for him. And that covers the pretty much the greatest enemy of freedom that we're facing today is socialism. So it's a great topic. So that's me. That's me, writer, teacher, and a guest on your show.
Well, very pleased to have you. And so the other books, before we get to Bassam, the other books that you've written, were they fiction, non-fiction?
Yeah, they were. Okay, now you got to understand a world records book. I wrote one. Now, you understand I'm out here in Utah, and out here in Utah there's a lot of Mormons out here, so I wrote a book on the superlatives they've done, and it's called The Skousen Book of Mormon World Records. I know that's another gripping title that you would really want to get a hold of soon, but out here in Utah, it was a lot of fun. Everybody enjoyed it. A lot of Mormons have done some interesting things in life. But these are all nonfiction. I did another one on a book called the Comrade Paul's Socialist Bathroom Reader. Now, there's one, Stephan. You need to get that one for the whole family. That was actually, the title sounds silly, Socialist Bathroom Reader, but when I was writing The Naked Socialist, there's a lot of these interesting, strange stories that I would run across, and I thought, I got to put these together in a book. So that's what that one is. It's Soviet-era humor, people behind during World War II or the Cold War during the Iron Curtain. They had a strange sense of humor. I gathered a lot of that together. Tried to see what the world records were for these socialists, like who has the best facial hair. Now, they seem to need to have facial hair. Have you noticed that? Hitler had his great mustache, and Stalin and Lenin, they had to look the appropriate part. Everybody had to look unique. Who was the greatest killer? That's nothing to be proud of, but I've got Mao as the man who is responsible for in excess of 75 million deaths. Those kinds of things didn't have a place in The Naked Socialist, so I put them into this book. Anyway, so there's about 7 or 8 books that I've written that have been along those lines.
Yeah, and just quickly, apologies, because the listeners will have noticed I attributed your Naked Socialist book to your father. It's the other 2 books that are your father's, and that was one that, as you said, you finished yourself. And that was a very good book, by the way. I mean, I remember discussing that, and the start of The Naked Communist is pretty good, and what's frightening about it is that so much of it, reads so true today, and it shouldn't, but it does. Yeah,
very rough, prophetic, evil and wrong and oppression and tyranny and dictatorship always has the same ending. So throughout history.
Right. Okay. Well, as we go on here, Paul, as we get towards the book, what prompted you, before we get into the book and what it's about, what prompted you to write it?
Well, Bassam and the 7 Secret Scrolls, I started out with a goal of trying to take some of these principles or violation of principles that I wrote about in Naked Socialist and my father wrote about, and I wanted to put them in a context that younger readers would enjoy. That's why I started. I thought, how can I show how not having free will or free agency, having that taken away and being compelled by force to do things, how can I share that failure formula with the younger people so they could enjoy it? And then at the same time, I wanted to write something that was safe for my children and my grandchildren to read. It didn't have some strange values in there or violation of values that so much of the youth books directed to the youth seem to have nowadays. So I wanted to write a safe book that taught some important things and that was a fun adventure story. That was my beginning place. That's what prompted me to sit down and start writing.
Okay, well, that's a good introduction to why you came to write the book. I'm going to take a commercial break here, Paul, and after these messages we'll come back and then we'll start into the book and talk about it. Hang on, folks. We'll be right back.
You can lose 10, 20, 30 pounds or more with Maximum Slim's first ever rapid weight loss guarantee. Today, you get Maximum Slim, an advanced fat and carb blocker, absolutely risk-free. The all-natural ingredients in Maximum Slim are a powerful weight loss combination. The Maximum Slim formula turns your body into a fat-burning furnace that supercharges your weight loss. Advanced fat and carb blocker stops the breakdown of sugar so your body doesn't store it as fat. Today, you'll get both of these products absolutely risk-free with no obligation. Only pay shipping. There are no expensive meal plans or exhausting DVDs. Just take Maximum Slim twice a day. It's fast, simple, and now it's guaranteed. Look, you can start losing weight today or not. Go back to your high school days and wear your favorite jeans again. Guaranteed. Call now and get both weight loss formulas free. Call 800-451-0228. 800-451-0228. That's 800-451-0228.
Doc, you gotta give it to me straight.
All right.
'Cause I'm dying here. I mean, take a look at this letter from the IRS.
Oh, my.
This is killing me, Doc. I tell you, it's killing me.
Cheer up, my friend.
Huh?
The tax doctor is here. My diagnosis tells me that you're going to be just fine.
Really?
The tax doctor will not rest until we find you the best possible tax settlement.
Really, Doc?
Guaranteed.
If the IRS claims you owe them $10,000 or more in business or personal back taxes, call a tax doctor right now. We could save you up to 75% if you qualify. Guaranteed or you pay nothing. Call right now for free details.
800-917-8546. 800-917-8546. 800-917-8546. That's 800-917-8546.
This is Patrick Come Lately Talk Radio, coming to you live via the internet, via rebroadcast on WRSDB, the Red State Talk Radio Network, or from the recordings at archives.patrickcomelately.us. And thanks for sticking with us, folks. I'm talking tonight with Paul Skousen, and he is talking about his book. We've touched on it, why he came to write it, but the story of the book is Bassam and the Seven Secret Scrolls. I have a bunch of questions about it, but I'm going to start with the first one. If I look at the title or the front page of the book here, at the bottom, it has the very big words, Book 1. So, and the story does stop halfway or maybe one-third of the way. How many books is this supposed to be? Is it a trilogy or a duology? Or?
Yeah, it'll be a trilogy. It could be one book, but it would be as fat as War and Peace or something like that.
Yeah.
So I broke it up into 3 books, and they are definitely 3 distinct but linked stories.
Yeah. And it's still a fairly thick book, Paul. Even I have to say the letters are better for people of my age. That they're not too small, but nice and easily readable. So nice book. So anyway, we're only part way through the story when we get to the end. So let's start at the beginning. And again, we're going to have to skirt around some of the things because we don't want to give away too much of the book. But if you want to start and talk a little bit at a high level about roughly what the story is.
Right. The story is, it picks up on the legend of 7 scrolls that have existed for more than 1,000 years. And these scrolls have secrets in them. And the secrets lead the possessor of the scroll to prosperity at levels that are just unimaginable. And people have always speculated, well, what are these 7 messages, these 7 secrets? Are they treasure maps? What are these? So for a long time, people were looking for those. In the meantime, the possessors of the scrolls continued to prosper, and these were the caravan people that were moving goods back and forth across the continents, Asian continent, and over into the European areas of ancient times. These were the builders of fantastic wealth. When Columbus sailed to go around and find a shorter route to Asia, that was one of the reasons. Is there some way we can circumvent these higher taxes and our dependency on the caravan trades? So this is the story of a man named Zafir, who is the last holder of these 7 secret scrolls. He sees the end of his life coming. He needs to pass them on to another, and that other would be typically a son. It went father, son, father, son. He has no son, so he invites a friend's boy to go with him on a 2-year journey to be taught the secrets of these scrolls and also to be tested to see if he's mature, courageous, honorable, and has the integrity to contain those secrets and carry them into the next generation.
And, very interesting that. So, first of all, first question, and it does say on the back of the book, Paul Skousen enjoys visiting the Middle East for archaeology digs or just renewing friendships. This book obviously is set along the caravan route, and you mentioned that, the trade routes of that time across the Asia and the Middle East. In some ways, when I first started reading it, I thought, in some ways, kind of, let's say, a brave place or brave of you to place your story in that area, because the Middle East right now is probably not America's favorite place.
Right. Yeah. Any of your listeners would probably agree with me that there's some wonderful people in the Middle East, and it's in some instances a case of the tail wagging the dog. Good people, good families, faithful in their religious beliefs, faithful in their desires to have peace. Those are the folks that I make part of my story. It's the good-hearted people that happen to be born in the Middle East and had a great and wonderful culture and heritage that goes back so far. I've been there several times, and this story does take place, a beginning place in Jordan, in the city of Petra, the ancient ruins of Petra. Mm-hmm. Wonderful place to visit for anyone.
And I was going to ask about that. That was one of the questions I'd written down, because Petra in the book is called Rakim, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So
that's one of its. I was going to say that's one of its ancient names. Way back, a couple thousand years ago, it was called Rakim.
Well, and that was going to be, as we go along, some of my questions are going to be how much of this, is fiction, how much of it is fact. So it is the old name for Petra. The city of Rakim, if you like, does exist, and of course, yes, it is in what today is known as Jordan. So, yeah.
Yes, and that is correct. And we can get more into that. But I tried to make it as historically accurate as I possibly could based on the research.
Okay. Then I have a question. Let me get very specific, because there's another city that Bassam visits when he starts off on his trek with his, let's say, his mentor, who's called Zafir. He goes to a place on the coast. Is that also an ancient name or an existing name?
Yeah, Lukikom.
Yeah.
Right, that's another ancient city, and it was a launching off point for seafaring traders to get on their boats. They called them dhows, to take a dhow, and they're shallow keeled so they could get close to the coastlines, and they would move goods up and down. So the caravans could could cross over. They could either cross by land over the Sinai Peninsula and get down into Egypt, or they could simply go to the port at Lukikom and put their goods on the water. In those days, they were not as successful at navigation as they were later on. Nevertheless, a lot of sea trade did take place. So that is part of the story.
Okay, no, and one of the things that interested me, and as we get in talking about the caravan, I do have to say, yes, you're talking about the dhows, and the map in the book shows the old seafaring routes as well, and going, all the way along the coast of Asia. So it wasn't just the caravan route; it was also these dhows going across the Indian Ocean and up and down. And I happen to know, haven't been lucky enough to visit India. There's a lot of Arabic culture in India, a lot of Arabic words, a lot of connection there, and a lot of things. A lot more connection with that part of the world than we realize.
Yes, absolutely. It's surprising.
But the other thing, the reason for me to ask about that particular port city, and you may laugh at this, but not many people know, in addition to being Patrick come lately and having this British accent, I do actually have a very strong connection to the Netherlands. And that particular city that you have there, the name there, actually looks like it could be the words "nicely come" in Dutch or maybe in an antique Dutch. But I looked at that and sort of thought, is Paul playing some kind of joke here and injecting some Western Europe into this Middle Eastern story? But okay, so that is its real name. Okay,
that is its real name. Thank you.
Okay, so you got a little bit of trivia there. Then who knows? Maybe it got named by Dutch seafarers. You never know.
That could well be. There's more interaction there than we probably realize.
Exactly. Okay. Well, and before we get to Bassam and his journey, let's go to the beginning of the book, because there's another kind of riddle there. And again, if I start. Before if I ask too many questions, feel free to say, well, I don't want to go down that path, Stefan. Let the reader read the book. But
okay.
The start of the book, talk about Henri, right? The kind of janitor, I guess, at the museum, but he's really more than that. And he seems to have an awful lot of knowledge of history and languages, and that's something you stress at the beginning of the book. And the first thing that struck me there, there was something of, why that emphasis? Is there something else that may be revealed in a future book about Henri?
Yes, you've analyzed that really well. He does play a larger role, and I wanted to introduce that character at the beginning, as that introduces the whole story. There's a reason that this man, who sounds like a janitor at a museum, there's a reason that he does have a body of knowledge in his head, and that reason is significant, but we don't learn that until book number 3.
Okay, so I won't go any further down that. I'm not going to make any guesses. I'll let the readers read it, and they can make their own guesses, but there are... yeah, and again, you might be a very good writer and throwing out red herrings, but we'll see. We'll see.
Okay.
Okay, so we talked about Rakim, and so when you talk about Petra, and I haven't had the luxury of visiting that part of the world yet. It's something I'd like to do, although it's getting, I think, more and more difficult to be able to do that. But when you start the book, it says Rakim, and before the pyramids there was Rakim. So is Petra really that much older than the pyramids?
Well, the canyon city is quite old. Those carvings, those are recent. The pyramids were about 2600 BC, and these carvings didn't show up until about 300 or 400 BC. But the canyon city itself has been a dwelling place for people off and on much earlier, for a period much earlier than Egypt. So yes, it's very old. But the Nabateans that used to live there, they were pirates out on the Red Sea and some of the other waterways. They lived in this crack in the rock in this canyon city. That was their home. And they admired the Greeks. They wanted to appear to be rather sophisticated people, not pirates. So they went and started carving these beautiful monuments. Now, those among your listeners who've seen the Indiana Jones movies, the third movie, The Last Crusade, all of the major events occurs in this carved out, beautiful stone monument building that's right there in Petra, and it's called the Treasury. Back in the ancient days, they called it the Library, and that whole carving period, that was about 300, 400, 500 years BC is when that actually was put in place.
Okay, good. That's really interesting, Paul. Like I said, I would love a chance to go see that. It's on my bucket list, so I will keep my fingers crossed. Time is catching up with us again, so I'm going to take a quick break here, folks, and we'll be right back. And I think it's probably time to start talking about Bassam and his great journey. So we'll be back after these messages. And in the interest of time, just a very quick commercial. And the commercial is for the book itself. Just a reminder, you can buy the book at Amazon. It's called Bassam, Bassam, and the 7 Secret Scrolls. You can either search on Bassam or search on Paul Skousen and pick up maybe some of the other books he's written if you like. It's a great book. Paul originally started it as a family book, as perhaps a young people's book, but I think you'll find it a very interesting book in of itself and a good message as well. And one final quick thing before we go back to Paul. I do want to congratulate Primo Mondoni. I've mentioned his name on the show before. He runs the Red State Talk Radio Network, and my show is rebroadcast there. And I do want to alert my readers there are going to be some changes because Primo has announced a merger with WDFP Digital. That's another conservative channel coming from the Atlanta area. And these two stations are going to combine their forces, and they're actually going to have 2 channels. They have so many good hosts, they couldn't get everybody into one 24/7 programming time, so they are now going to have 2 channels, but this does mean some changes to the schedule. So if you're listening to my show via Red State Talk Radio, do go to the site and as of June 1st, check for any new schedule. That will be there. But anyway, congratulations to Primo. This is really going to take Red State Talk Radio to the next level. And now let's go back to Paul and Bassam and his 7 Secret Scrolls. Okay, thanks, folks. We're back in the show. I'm talking to Paul Skousen. We're talking about his captivating book, Bassam and the 7 Secret Scrolls, the story of a young boy who is befriended by an older guy, and he takes him on this caravan journey to test him and give him these 7 secret scrolls, and some of them are revealed in this first book. I presume the rest of the 7 will get revealed in the other books. One of the things that I know you'd like to talk about is the kind of the way you've got this metaphor of the caravan being representing a nation and how it operates. And that does come through in the story, that there are different kinds of caravans that are led by different kinds of people. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that, Paul?
Yes, that was part of the overall theme of the story. Here you have this independent, cohesive group of volunteers with everything they need to survive, to trade, to go to market, to defend themselves, to eat, to drink, to watch out, to guard themselves. It's like a nation. A sovereign nation has those same rights, duties, and responsibilities. When you have good leadership, then you prosper and grow. And with good leadership, caravans move across these great, vast regions, and they function in a way that helps them either grow or they shrink. People fear them or people respect them. I wanted to tell the story of a unit of a governed caravan that's operating under correct, true principles of freedom, free will, agency, where integrity and making an oath that really means something and being honest with one another and without any of these ideas about people having to lean on others for a free ride on the caravan. No, you got to carry your own weight. That whole concept is part of this book.
And you know, that for me is just one of the brilliant things you did, Paul, I have to say, because, you know, there's this captivating story, and yet these messages keep coming out, and you place them in such a beautiful way, and you know, at the right time. I think you did that masterfully. I'm really impressed.
Thank you.
Now, so Bassam is going to go off on this journey, and one thing again, and if I'm kind of pushing the limit here, do tell me. But you mentioned Zafir comes here; he doesn't have a son to hand these scrolls over to. What I did notice, though, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Bassam himself, his heritage, his background is also rather vague in the first book.
Yeah, that is correct. He's an orphan that was rescued after there was an attack on a caravan, and this little boy's parents were murdered, and he was left alone, and he was taken into the loving care of a woman named Dalal and her husband Kateb, and they raised him. So that was his beginning. So he had kind of a rough start as well. That wasn't as unusual as I thought when I first started doing research back in those days. There was a lot of upset families that occurred because of, in those early, 200, 300, 400 years BC, a lot of difficulty, a lot of warring tribes that left people in that state.
Yeah, well, and let me ask the elephant in the room question then, because there's not a lot about Bassam's parents, but does a later book perhaps relate any sort of relationship between the parents, or are they, with other characters in the book? Are they just kind of they were there and he was orphaned kind of thing? Or again, am I jumping at shadows? Or
no, well, his parents, his adoptive parents, are good-hearted, loving people going through the same struggles that we all go through raising our kids. And their part in this story is only that far, just that they raised him and tried to teach him good principles, how to be a good adult and a good contributor to the community. Okay. So they're good-hearted people.
Okay. So before we go off on the trek, and I do want to mention some of the places on there, you talk about the Silk Road, and the back of the book says, you visited the Middle East a lot. What about other parts along the Silk Road? Have you been lucky to travel any of that as much as in the book, or is that researched through other sources?
Yeah, the rest of the trek is researched through other sources. I've been to the Middle East several times and had a chance to go around and see these places with my own eyes and just loved it. I've not had the chance to go any farther east across the continent there, but I do look forward to that soon.
Okay. So that's on your bucket list, I can see.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Okay, so and I had one other question, because you throw in these Arabic words. That look similar to things that I know apply in the region. I was thinking, there's one there. You talk about the people, the Bedawi, and I'm sort of thinking, does that have anything to do with the Bedouin?
Right. That's more of an ancient form of that word. It means the same thing. For the characters, the places, and the names, I researched backwards as far as I could get to their original pronunciations to keep it as historically accurate to about 200 BC as I possibly could. So Bedawi is Bedouin.
Okay, yeah. So, good guess of mine. And
Yes.
you've answered my next question, which was, and you had actually mentioned it a few minutes ago as well. The time frame of the book is placed about 200 BC.
Right. Yeah, that's the Han Dynasty over in China, and that also plays a part when they get all the way over to the East Coast. And deal with those people.
I was going to ask about that because obviously, I don't think it's a big secret, but in the first book we don't quite reach China. There's I like the ending of the first book, by the way, and if we have time at the end, there's a short section I'd like to quote from right at the very end, because I think it's very beautiful as well. But yeah, so I was wondering about that. So it is the Han Dynasty. So you did have a time frame. I was just wondering whether you're trying to be sort of very generic. It seemed to me it could have been any time. It could have also been 1000 AD, although you don't mention it. That at a time that Muhammad had been active, and perhaps because there was a lot of violence in that time as well. So I was trying to guess. But it just seemed very generic. So, but you did have a time frame in mind, which was actually well before that.
Yeah, I didn't want to get into the Islamic period only because that was a time of unification, and that's what Muhammad was working so hard to do with the Quran, a common language, a common belief system. That was a lot of structure. Most of history was pre-Muhammad, so that's kind of what I wanted to touch on.
Yeah. And plus, if you want to be very pedantic about it, you could say Muhammad represents perhaps a certain capital city that starts with a W and ends with DC, trying to centralize power, right?
That's exactly right.
Good. And one other question about the wording used, and I thought, well, are you kind of tipping your hat here to a very powerful family that still exists in that part of the region? Because let's say one of the heroes at one point for Bassam, although, and again, I don't want to give away too much, but he's not there in all of the book, is somebody called Saud. And so look at that and think, well, of course you have the House of Saud in Arabia, right, and in Saudi Arabia. Again, deliberate or just a convenient common name in the time period you were writing about?
Right. In that instance, it's more because it was a common name, but there are connections to certain dynasties and families, and even some contemporary names. Okay. That I tried to reflect in some of those characters. So some will recognize that, hopefully, as they go through.
Right. Well, and I'm not a huge Middle East scholar, but like I said, these things jumped out a little bit at me. So as and I love your storytelling, because as you go down the route, you describe very well the changing of the scenery, and the way. That the old Silk Route went across some pretty rough terrain, but also full of all sorts of characters and bandits and everything. And you kind of, in addition to your message that comes out from these scrolls as they are revealed one by one, you've also got this beautiful description of how that. How the caravan is going along. How difficult was it to find information about the caravans, that far back?
Yeah, fortunately, there has been quite a bit of research done, And I tapped into that in multiple sources and found out what it was like to cross the great deserts. How did you prepare for caravans that would follow you? And that's why they would sometimes dig a cistern, and it would hold water for those that came after. Crossing some portions, they needed to stay out in the deep desert or the deep wastelands for safety purposes. There were bandits that would try to assemble enough people, a big enough army of bandits, that they could get rich themselves by attacking these caravans. So these people would take different routes, and if they couldn't amass a caravan large enough to protect themselves, they could go through populated areas, but they had to pay taxes. All of that wonderful information has been assembled and put together across multiple sources. So yeah, it was a lot of research to see what life was like out on the caravan.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, you really bring it to life, and it really is interesting to read it, and in some ways, made me even more anxious to perhaps get out and see if I can get an opportunity to visit somewhere like Petra, and of course also visit the Holy Land would be nice. My wife's been there, but I never had. So retirement is approaching, and it's on the bucket list. So who knows? I'm just looking. We're getting close to the next commercial break, so let's take that now, Paul. And to my listeners, we'll be back again after these messages. Just a reminder: if you need any of these services, please use the 800 number in the commercials, because they help support the show. And folks, welcome back to the show. We're into the final minutes of the show. Paul, thanks for being a great guest. I don't think I have given away any secrets talking about the book. And before I forget, let's do that. And thank you for reminding me about that in the break. People who would like to read the book, where can they get it?
Sure. You can go to Amazon.com is a great place to start and order it from Amazon, and just go ahead and search on either Skousen, the last name, Skousen, or the title of the book, Bassam and the Seven Secret Scrolls. You can also go to the publisher's website, Izzard Inc. They've done such a great job for me. IZZARD Inc. INK.com.
As in Eddie, spoken as a true Brit here.
There we go.
Yeah, yeah. Eddie Izzard, yeah. I was wondering about that, but I'm sure no connection, but no, and they actually have been very good, and also getting this meeting set up, so they're good folks. I'll have to talk to you off the air about that, because that's one of my other bucket list things. I'm about 2/3 of the way through my own novel, actually, so trying to join your ranks there, Paul, or give you some competition. Well, hardly competition, but...
I'm sure it's going to be great.
It's going to be different. Let's put it that way. Not competition in terms of subject matter, but also historical, faction, fiction, whatever you want to call it. Okay, but back to your book. Sorry. As Bassam is going through this, there's also a second character that is quite important, and of course, that is a certain lady.
Yes. He left his young love behind, and her name is Rasha.
Yeah.
And she happens to be the daughter of Zafir, the mentor who's teaching Bassam these 7 scrolls, and so she was left in the care of Bassam's mom and dad to kind of fill the void while he's off on the trip. And Rasha and Bassam, they talk, they make journal entries. That's the best they can do.
Yeah. And I rather like that, because, you read it and it's as if, the modern day idiom is, you think, oh, they're exchanging, emails or even just ordinary letters. But then you realize, well, no, they couldn't do that. They didn't have that in those days, right? And so they're sort of writing these things to each other, and you've done that very well. And and yet you know that in that time they wouldn't have known what the other was writing. But it's just this nice way you weave everything together, and that I thought you did that very well as well.
Thanks.
And something else, and we're getting into the last couple of minutes. So what I'm going to do, I'd like to read one short piece from the book, and I know your publisher suggested would I like some audio of you, because you also have an audiobook version of this. So listeners, if you prefer audiobooks, that is also available. And of course, with Paul's dulcet tones, that would be a very good book to hear. But I said, well, I prefer to talk to Paul live, but I would like to read one piece because I think it is very beautiful. It's about you'll remember from the end of the first book, right? Hanging on the far side of Lookout June. Out of his sight, a beautiful red silken bird rests on the steep slope of the sand. When the evening breeze begins to blow, the bird will take wing, and by itself it will be lifted into the arms of the gentle wind and rise. It will climb into the sky like a phoenix, tethered to the earth by the twine, marking a place of tears. It will hang above, not fleeing or hiding, but fluttering in wonder and glory as the sky above it fades from pink to orange to dusk. And when the last light of the sun disappears and the wind dies, the bird will gently float back to the dune, disappearing from view as before, to rest for a season until it rises again. And I thought that was a very beautiful thing. He's talking, of course, about that kite that he'd picked up in another city. But that's really very nice. Where did you get the idea for that?
Probably from as a kid. I loved to fly kites, and I left one tied to our front porch, and the wind just kept it up, but the wind died. And the string was draped across a bunch of houses, and then when I got up in the morning, the wind picked up again, and it lifted the kite right up, and it was back in the sky.
Okay. Well, any last words, Paul? Because I see the clock has caught up with us again. Any last words that you'd like to say? I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here.
Well, thank you so much. There's so much material out there nowadays that are teaching things that are just not healthy for society, for a person, for a family. And this was my attempt to say, hey, there are good values to be learned, and here's a wonderful story that's safe for the kids to read, that they'll enjoy, that teaches them that the best things of life are worth staying honest to all the time.
And let me concur absolutely with that. And it isn't just for kids, or else I'm a big kid at heart, because it's also a very captivating story for adults. Anybody can learn from it. It's a great book. So I really do. I heartily recommend it to all my listeners. Go out and find it. And it's a little early yet, but when Christmas time comes around, folks, there's a very good suggestion. This would be a great thing for the kids and the grandkids to teach them good values, as you said. Paul, thank you very, very much for coming tonight. It really has been an honor to have you back, and I look forward to having you back in the future, maybe to talk about The Naked Communist, or maybe to talk about the subsequent books to this story.
Wonderful. Thanks, Stephen. I appreciate your time. It was fun.
And again, thanks to Paul Skousen for that. Remember, his book can be found at Amazon.com or IsItInc.com in both hardcover and audiobooks. And I'm not even sure whether he has he may even have a Kindle version. But anyway, folks, it is that time to say TTFN. Please join me next week for a normal show of news and views. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the Patriot Come Lately Show. Please take what you have learned and share it with friends and family. Better still, tell them about the show so they can listen too. Remember to support the advertisers on the show. It helps keep this show on the air, and I thank you for that. I'm looking forward to joining you on the next show. Until then, keep spreading our message. Goodbye, and God bless America.